Binge eating disorder and weight loss, two things that don't normally go hand in hand. Binge eating disorder normally involves the consumption of a large volume of food in a fairly short span of time until you're at a point where you're feeling comfortably full. And weight loss generally involves some kind of food restriction, so they are kind of polar opposites. But is it possible to lose weight while dealing with binge eating disorder? Short answer is yes. I am living and breathing proof of it. But before we get into how I did it, I'm just going to add a quick disclaimer. If you are concerned about binge eating disorder or any other disorder, please consult a professional. The internet is not a substitute for their experience or qualifications. Like I said, I did manage to lose weight while dealing with binge eating disorder. In fact, while still dealing with the binge eating disorder. So yes, you can lose weight. In a little bit, I'm going to come on to whether it should be something you're thinking about right now if you're dealing with binge eating. But before that, I'm just going to explain what happened with me. So to give you a little bit of background in terms of my own history of binge eating disorder, in terms of scale of binge and how many calories I would have, I think I've seen accounts on Reddit and YouTube and other places that, you know, a binge for some people is somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 calories, sometimes more. And I think generally for me, binge eating was, if I had a binge in a day, it would have probably brought my calories for the day up to somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 in most cases. So it was still in excess for me, and it was still to the point where I was feeling uncomfortably full. But in terms of scale, it's something that within a few days felt comparatively easy to overcome compared to something like, 6, 7, 8, 10,000 or more calories. Also, apart from when my binge eating was at its worst, my binges have tended to be once a week, once every 3 or 4 days at most. So it wasn't a sequence of, it was like 3, 4, 5 days in a row. It was sort of a one-off. I'd be fine for 2 or 3 days and then it would happen again. I kind of had that space between binges where I could allow my body to recover a little bit. So if you factor in that even while my binge eating was at its worst, I was still quite active. I was still doing 10, 12, 15,000 steps a day. I was still doing strength training 3 or 4 times a week. I still am. I'm still very active. But so I was naturally on a day-to-day basis burning a decent number of calories anyways. With binge eating, I did gain weight at first, but then it sort of peaked at a certain point. My body was set up pretty well to burn calories fairly quickly and get past binges and overcome the side effects of binges quite quickly as well. But what really made the difference for me was finding something that gave me more fulfillment and more enjoyment than any binge I've ever had could. And for me, that happened to be running. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same for you, but running just kind of worked. I used to run a few years ago regularly when I was a bit younger. I got back into it recently. And I guess the plus side of using running as my tool against binge eating disorder is that I know physically how I feel after a binge. I also know the endorphin rush I feel after a run. And that sense of fulfillment starts to outweigh that sort of sense of comfort that I used to get from binge eating. It didn't stop my binge eating entirely, but it sort of hit the brakes on my thought process because I had this other thing that I was kind of fixated on, which was giving me a lot of fulfillment and a lot of enjoyment. And it was enough for me to sort of, when I felt the cravings for a binge, kind of hit the brakes and say, okay, you're going to go for a run tomorrow. Do you really want to feel, lethargic and heavy and not be able to put your best effort in? And more often than not, that thought process is enough to hit the brakes and get me to not binge. It's not foolproof and it doesn't work every time, but I've gone from probably a weekly binge or maybe once every 10 days to once every 3 weeks. The scale of my binges has come down as well. And yeah, I have lost a lot more weight. I guess it's kind of from two things working in synergy. So one is that running for me burns a lot of calories anyways. So that's going to help me reduce my weight. And the other thing is that because I enjoy running so much and I know how binge eating directly impacts it, it stops me from putting those extra calories in. So you have this, on the one hand, this tool is stopping the excess calories from going in. And on the other hand, it's also burning off more calories itself. So combining those is enough to kind of slow down my binge eating and actually help me lose weight. But I do still binge. I can't say I'm completely past it. My last binge was maybe 5 days ago. But then when I stepped on the scales yesterday morning, I was 0.1 kilograms off the lightest I've ever been in my adult life. So I'm making progress. I'm getting control of my binge eating and it seems to be going well. Coming back to my original point about binge eating or weight loss, yes, it is possible to lose weight while dealing with binge eating disorder. But if you look at how it happened for me, I needed multiple things to align. It was how many calories I had in a binge. So for me, like 5,000 was probably the absolute most I've ever had. It was how frequent my binges were because they were generally at my worst 2 to 3 times a week. I don't think I've ever had any consecutive days. It was the fact that even with binge eating disorder, I was still relatively active, so I was still getting that calorie burn. It was finding something that gave me more fulfillment and more enjoyment than binge eating ever did. And it was getting that deeper understanding of what was causing my binges and using my running as kind of my tool to slow me down on that front as well. So there were a lot of different things which kind of came together to make it happen for me. Like I said, it is possible to lose weight while dealing with binge eating disorder, but like I mentioned earlier, the question of whether it's something you should be focusing on or not is completely different. Binge eating disorder can typically be associated with stress, with some kind of emotional trauma, and a whole host of other mental health issues. So that if you try and add a goal around something which can be as triggering or as much of a sensitive area as weight or body image, you might just end up doing more harm than good for your mental health. If that sounds like you, I would recommend working through whatever's causing you stress or whatever's giving you those emotional triggers first. Whether weight loss is something you should be focusing on or not, it's not my place to tell you. From my own experience, and this is where my recommendations come from, it can make more sense to focus on whatever is causing the stress or emotions that you're currently going through before you add something else on top of that. When you feel that you've addressed those, then it can be easier to give yourself another goal to work on.